Hello, everyone. Today we are going to look at proteins. Proteins are one of the macronutrients that are very essential in the body because they carry out build up and repair body processes. They are used for growth and repair. So what are proteins? Proteins are macromolecules consisting of long chains of amino acid subunits. Amino acids are the simplest or the basic unit of protein. In plants, the plant structure is primarily carbohydrates, but the structure of humans is primarily built on proteins. So that is why proteins are very essential in the body. All the structures you see on your body are made up of proteins. The recommended dietary allowance for protein is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight for a healthy adult. And protein requirements also increase during hypermetabolic stress and in disease. And also some conditions, for example, pregnancy, you find that the protein requirement becomes a little much higher. The protein-rich foods are obtained primarily from animal flesh or from animal products, for example, eggs and milk. But also you can find proteins in legumes, such as beans. So let's look at some functions of proteins. Most plant foods are mainly relatively poor in proteins, except for the legumes, as I've already said. And dietary proteins are very powerful compounds that build and repair body tissues, from your hair to your fingernails up to your muscles. So every part of your body is made up of proteins. So that is one of the major functions of protein, for build up and repair of body tissues. Proteins also maintain body structure. They maintain the structure of the body. They speed up chemical reactions in the body as they act as enzymes in the body. All the enzymes we have in our system are made up of proteins. Proteins also serve as chemical messengers, for example, hormones. And they fight infections. They are very important in the immunity. And they transport oxygen from the lungs to the body tissues. And this one is more applicable to hemoglobin and myoglobin. Proteins as an energy source. Proteins primarily provide 4 calories of energy per gram. However, the body uses proteins for energy only if the carbohydrates and the fat intake is insufficient. The body will not mobilize proteins unless the carbohydrate and the fat stores are not enough. The main reason here is that when proteins are tapped as an energy source, the proteins are diverted from the many critical functions that it performs in our bodies. So to maintain the function of proteins in the body, it is very important that they are not diverted from their function to provide energy. That is why the body only resorts to proteins as a last resort. Proteins are made of smaller units called amino acids. And we have about 20 amino acids in our body. And out of those 20, about 8 cannot be made by the body in sufficient quantities to maintain health. And in older adults, we have about 9 of them. And these amino acids, because the body cannot make them in sufficient quantities, and we need to obtain them from our diet, they are considered essential. They're called essential amino acids, and they must be obtained from the food that we eat. How do we obtain proteins from the diet? When we eat foods that are high in proteins, the digestive tract breaks this dietary protein into amino acids. So it is these amino acids that are absorbed into the bloodstream and then sent to the cells that need them. And then once they get into the cells, they recombine into the functional proteins that our bodies need. And some people, especially in developed countries, consume more protein than the body needs. Because these extra amino acids cannot be stored for later use, the body destroys these amino acids and excretes their byproducts out of the body. Protein energy malnutrition. This results as a sign of deficiency in protein consumption. So this can cause serious health implications, for example, marasmus and kwashiorkor, and these are life-threatening conditions that result from protein deficiency. In some health conditions, for example, illness, stress, and pregnancy, and also breastfeeding in women, they cause an enormous demand on the body as it builds the tissues and fights infections. And all these conditions require an increased protein consumption. To support their rapid development, infants and young children require relatively more protein than adults. And once in adolescence, sex hormone differences cause boys to develop a little more muscle and bone than girls. And this results to higher protein requirements in boys than in girls during adolescence. So let's look at amino acids briefly. Proteins, as I already earlier said, are built up of amino acids. They are long chains of amino acids. And amino acids are the subunits of proteins in much the same way as carbohydrates. Monosaccharides are the subunits of carbohydrates. And fatty acids and glycerol are the subunits of fats in the body. So we have about 20 naturally occurring amino acids that have been identified with certainty, and they all have an NH2 amino group and a COOH carboxyl group. So these are some of the 20 amino acids that we have in nature: glycine, alanine, serine, threonine, cysteine, valine, leucine, isoleucine, methionine, proline, phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, aspartic acid, glutamic acid, asparagine, glutamine, histidine, lysine, and arginine. So these are the 20 amino acids that we have that exist in nature. But out of these 20 amino acids, 10 are essential and the other 10 are non-essential. So let's briefly look at the amino acid formula. We said that the amino acid has an amine group on one end and a carboxyl group on the other end, as shown on this formula. And then it has the ARA group. It's on this ARA group that other elements attach. So as this formula states, the amino and the carboxyl groups are both attached to a single carbon atom, which is called the alpha carbon atom. And attached to the carbon atom is a variable group called the ARA. And it is in their ARA groups that the molecules of the 20 standard amino acids differ from one another. It is the ARA group that differentiates the different amino acids. For example, in the simplest of the acids, glycine, in glycine, you find that the ARA group consists of a single hydrogen atom. So this is the simplest amino acid that we have in nature, whereby the ARA group has only a hydrogen atom. But in the other more complex amino acids, you find that the ARA group contains other elements apart from hydrogen. It may also include oxygen, nitrogen, or sulfur as well. For example, in alanine, we have the ARA group having one carbon atom and 3 hydrogen atoms. And then in valine, it is 3 carbon atoms with 7 hydrogen atoms. So how are proteins formed? The first step in this process involves the combination of 2 amino acids by a reaction between the amino and the carboxyl group. So this process involves the loss of a water molecule, and this is a condensation reaction. And these two amino acids become joined by a peptide link to form a dipeptide. When two amino acids combine, they form a dipeptide. So a continued condensation leads to the addition of further amino acids to this dipeptide. And this results in the formation of a long chain of amino acids, which is called a polypeptide. A particular polypeptide may be composed of as many as 100 amino acids. And a typical protein consists of one or more polypeptide chains. And these chains may either be folded, branched, or cross-linked at intervals. And the cross-linkages may be of several sorts: hydrogen bonds, ionic bonds, or even sulfur bridges. And these sulfur bridges are the strongest, and they contribute to the great toughness of certain proteins in nature. So although we have about 20 amino acids occurring naturally, the number of the possible ways in which they can combine is almost infinite. So they can recombine and recombine to form different structures infinitely. The individuality of a particular protein is determined by the sequence of amino acids comprising its polypeptide chains, together with the pattern of branching, folding, and cross-linkages. Some proteins may contain only a proportion of the known amino acids, and others may contain all of them. Protein structure. Proteins primarily assume four structures. We have the primary structure, the secondary structure, the tertiary, and the quaternary structure. The primary structure is the chain of amino acids of which the polypeptides are composed. The peptide bonds are formed between sequential amino acids according to directions on mRNA. And the completed protein is a linear chain of amino acids. So the primary chain primarily contains of only a long chain that has no branching. It has a linear chain. The secondary structure refers to the helical coiling of the chains. So in the secondary structure, you find that the primary structure starts to coil. As you can see in this structure above, it shows you the coiling and recoiling of the primary structure to form a helical chain. And then the attractions between the arar groups of amino acids create helices and pleated sheet structures. So in the secondary structure, we primarily have the helical structure and the pleated sheets. And then the tertiary structure refers to the way the helically coiled chains are folded. In the tertiary structure, you find that the secondary structure becomes more folded and complex. It folds further. The helices and pleated sheets are folded into compact domains. And then the quaternary structure refers to a structure where the several polypeptide chains are clamped together. Now, you find that in the quaternary structure, the tertiary structure is foiled further and clamped together more compactly. When a protein is made up of more than one polypeptide chain, we form the quaternary structure. So let's look at some properties of amino acids. The protein structure is critical for protein function. If the linear protein sequence is altered, as in certain genetic diseases, this protein becomes unable to form active sites, and its activity becomes limited or eliminated entirely. So one feature of proteins related to their structure is that they both have acidic and basic properties. As we looked at its structure having the amine group and the carboxyl group. The carboxyl group, this is due to the presence of the amino, that is the basic, and the carboxyl, which is the acidic. So the carboxyl group is the one that contributes to the acidity of the amino acid. And the amine group is the one that contributes to the basicity of the amino acid. So this makes it possible for the protein to combine with basic or acidic substances, causing them to function as buffers. So this is one of the properties of protein. They are able to act as buffers due to the presence of both the acidic and the amine properties. The classification of proteins according to structure. We have various classification of proteins according to structure. For example, one of them is the fibrous proteins. And these are proteins that are made up of peptide chains twisted into string-like structures. And the molecules resemble a fiber either as a coil or simply extended. So the fibrous proteins give protein molecules a distinct elastic property that is evident in wool, hair, and dog gluten. When you look at your hair, the way it is coiled, this explains the fibrous nature of a protein. Some of the examples of fibrous proteins are collagen, keratin, fibrinogen, and muscle proteins. And we are going to look at each of these in detail. Collagen. Collagen makes up bone, skin, tendons, and cartilage, and it is the most abundant protein that is found in vertebrates. And this molecule usually contains 3 very long polypeptide chains. Each has about 1,000 amino acids that twist into a regularly repeating triple helix. And this gives tendons and skin their great tensile strength. When you hold your skin, you can see the extensibility and tensility of the skin. So this strength is contributed by the tight twisting of the long polypeptide chains made up of about 1,000 amino acids. When these long collagen fibrils are denatured by boiling, their chains are shortened to form gelatin. Keratin. Keratin makes up the outermost layer of the skin and the hair, the scales, the hooves, the nails, and the feathers of animals. And this twists into a regular repeating coil called an alpha helix. It serves to protect the body against environmental damage. Keratin is completely insoluble in water. When you extract your nail and place it in water, it cannot dissolve, even the hair, unless you burn it. So this keratin can only be destroyed in the presence of high temperatures. Its many disulfide bonds make it an extremely stable protein that is able to resist the action of proteolytic protein hydrolyzing enzymes. So earlier on we said that the disulfide bonds are the strongest of the bonds that are seen in proteins. And that is why keratin is very, very strong and highly insoluble in water. Fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is a blood plasma protein that is responsible for blood clotting. With the catalytic action of thrombin, fibrinogen is converted into molecules of the insoluble protein fibrin, which link together to form clots. Then the muscle protein, myosin, is one of the examples of muscle protein. This protein chiefly is responsible for muscle contraction, and it combines with actin, which is another muscle protein, forming actomyosin. And these are the different filaments of which shorten, causing the contracting action of muscles. So muscles contract when they shorten, and then when they lengthen, they relax. So the second type of proteins we have is the globular proteins. The first we had was the fibrous proteins. Under the fibrous proteins, we had the fibrinogen, we had the keratin, we had the collagen, and now we are looking at the globular proteins. These are the proteins which have their molecules in a tangled or globular chain, coiled into a compact spherical molecule. Such proteins are relatively soluble and they readily go into colloidal suspension. They play a dynamic role in body metabolism. Such examples are albumin, globulin, casein, hemoglobin, all of the enzymes that you know, and the protein hormones. The albumins and globulins are classes of soluble proteins abundant in animal cells, blood serum, milk, and eggs. And hemoglobin is a respiratory protein that carries oxygen throughout the body. It is also a transport protein, and it is responsible for the bright red color of the red blood cells. Enzymes. All of the enzymes in our bodies are globular proteins, which combine rapidly with other substances called substrates to catalyze the numerous chemical reactions in the body. Chiefly responsible for metabolism and its regulation, these molecules have catalytic sites on which substrates fits in a lock and key manner to trigger and control metabolism throughout the body. Hormones. These ones come from the endocrine glands. They stimulate target organs that in turn initiate and control important activities. For example, the rate of metabolism and the production of digestive enzymes and milk. Some hormones, for example, insulin and glucagon, that regulate the glucose levels in the body. These are also protein in nature. Insulin is secreted by the islets of the Langerhans, and it regulates carbohydrate metabolism by controlling the blood glucose levels. Then thyroglobulin, released from the thyroid gland, regulates the overall metabolism in the body. And then calcitonin also from the thyroid lowers the blood calcium levels and regulates it. And we know that calcium is very important in muscle contraction and relaxation. Antibodies. These are also called immunoglobulins. These antibodies make up the thousands of different proteins that are generated in the blood serum in reaction to antigens. These are the body-invading substances or organisms. A single antigen may elicit the production of many antibodies, which combine with different sites on the antigen molecule. Then they neutralize it and cause it to precipitate from the blood. And then the third type of proteins we have is the conjugated proteins. In general, these proteins fall into two groups, as discussed above. And sometimes, however, proteins may, according to structure, be called conjugated proteins. So many structures found in organisms consist of protein combined with another compound to form a conjugated protein. So you find that conjugated proteins are not primarily proteins. These proteins have another substance that is joined onto it. That is why they're called conjugated proteins. Then the non-protein component to which this protein is attached is called a prosthetic group. Egg yolk, mucus, and hemoglobin are also examples of conjugated proteins. So you find that in hemoglobin, there is an iron that is attached. Inside the structure of hemoglobin, there is a ferrous iron substrate, and this is the prosthetic group. Then in egg yolk, the prosthetic group is phosphoric acid. In mucus, it is a carbohydrate. In hemoglobin, it is an iron-containing pigment called heme. So if the protein is conjugated with a carbohydrate, the resulting compound is called a glycoprotein. And this was the classification of proteins according to structure. And then we also have the classification of the proteins according to biological value. Biological value of a protein is the measure of how nourishing a protein is. That is, how much of a protein will be made available to the body for protein synthesis. Proteins with essential amino acids in the proportion required by the human body are said to have high biological value. That nitrogen is available for growth and repair. According to this classification, we have complete and the incomplete proteins. The complete proteins contain the essential amino acids, and they are regarded as proteins of high biological value. It's because they contain amino acids in all proportions, which promote growth when used as the sole source of protein in the diet. Animal proteins found in such foods, for example, eggs, milk, meat, fish, and poultry, are considered as complete proteins because they contain all the essential amino acids that our bodies need. The incomplete proteins are poor quality proteins, the proteins of low biological value. They have a limited value, and if used as a sole source of protein in a diet, they cannot support growth fully. So most vegetable proteins except soybean are incomplete proteins. Plant proteins found in vegetables, grains, and beans lack one or more of the essential amino acid. However, these plant proteins can be combined in the diet to provide all of the essential amino acids, and this is known as supplementation. You can supplement these amino acids or these proteins to provide complete proteins in the diet. One of the good examples is rice and beans. When you combine rice and beans, you get complete proteins. Each of these foods lacks one or more essential amino acids, but the amino acids missing in rice are found in beans, and the amino acid that is missing in beans is found in rice. So when you eat rice and beans in combination, you can obtain a complete protein. So people who do not eat animal proteins, for example, vegetarians, can meet their protein needs with diets that are rich in grains, dried peas and beans, rice, nuts, and tofu. Supplementary value of a protein. The supplementary value of a protein refers to the capacity of a protein to make good of another's deficiency. If one consumes one type of protein that is lacking certain amino acids in combination to another containing this missing amino acid, then there will be supplementation between these two products. One example is eating bread and gelatin. Bread is deficient in lysine, whereas gelatin is rich in lysine but deficient in tryptophan. So when you add these two in combination, you'll be able to obtain both the lysine and the tryptophan amino acids. Others include fish and rice, legumes and cereals. You can go ahead and also look for other examples. The proteins in the diet. Proteins are very important constituents of our diet. Yeah, in the body cells, the various proteins are assembled from the necessary amino acids, and it is imperative that all the amino acids should be available in sufficient quantities. In humans, 10 of the amino acids can be synthesized by the body, the rest cannot. And this process involves transamination, where the amino group is removed from one of the dietary amino acids and transferred to a carbohydrate derivative, which is then converted into a new amino acid. So these particular amino acids are not required in the diet, and they are called non-essential because the body can synthesize them. The other 10 amino acids cannot be made by the body, and they are called essential. But 2 of these are required for growth only and are not required by adults. The other 8 are required all the time, though they may vary in their degree of indispensability. The older views of the nutritional classification of amino acids have categorized them into 2 groups: the essential, indispensable, and the non-essential or dispensable. Although this classification has been maintained, the definition of the non-essential amino acids has become blurred as more information on the intermediary metabolism of these compounds becomes available. And recent authors now divide the non-essential amino acids into 2 classes. We have the truly non-essential and then the conditionally essential amino acids. The non-essential amino acids are now more rigidly defined as those synthesized by either reductive amination of a keto acid, by ammonia, or by transamination of a carbon chain synthesized in the central pathway of the Krebs cycle. So according to this definition, only glutamate, aspartate, and alanine should be regarded as truly non-essential amino acids. And then the conditional essential are defined as those that derive from the metabolism of either other amino acids or other complex nitrogenous metabolites. One key point is that the synthesis of these amino acids does not involve the simple transamination process. The term conditionally essential recognizes that in principle, these amino acids may be needed in the diet unless abundant amounts of their precursors are available for their synthesis at nutritionally significant rates. And you have to note that there may be physiological circumstances, for example, in the newborn, in which the enzymes involved in what are quite complex synthetic pathways may be present in insufficient amounts. So you find that there is dietary requirement for these amino acids. General functions of proteins. Proteins have various functions in the body, for example, forming structures of the body, such as the cell membranes, the connective tissue, the muscle fibers, the skeletal materials. Like the fats and carbohydrates, proteins can be broken down to release energy. And we said protein can only be used for energy in conditions of starvation. But even then, there is always the less essential tissues, such as the skeletal muscles and the gut wall, which are used first. The proteins can also act as regulators in that they control the chemical reactions and metabolic processes which occur in organisms. We looked at the deficiency of proteins. The effects of protein deficiency include in pregnancy. The baby may be stillborn or premature. We find that this pregnant woman, if she lacks protein in the diet, she may end up giving birth to a stillbirth or even premature child that is underweight. In infants and in early childhood, it can cause stunted growth, mental retardation, and kwashiorkor. While in adults, it may cause weakness, anemia, thin muscles, diarrhea, recurrent infections, delay in wound healing, edema, and liver cirrhosis. So there are very detrimental effects of deficiency of proteins in the body. We have various sources of proteins. The animal proteins are the best for bodybuilding. For example, the milk, the curd, cheese, eggs, fish, and meat. Then the vegetable proteins, for example, groundnuts and soya beans, are the best sources. The others you can obtain from cereals, pulses, legumes, for example, peas and beans, and oil seeds. Proteins processing and digestibility. The digestibility of protein sources is affected by many factors. These proteins are kept in proper configuration by hydrogen and ionic interactions. And these bonds are loosened in the presence of acids, salts, and heat. And this brings us to the point of protein denaturation. By denaturing proteins, these methods also soften the connective tissue in proteins and releases muscle proteins from their attachments. And this makes all the proteins more available to the digestive enzymes. The plant protein is less well digested than animal proteins because it is encased in carbohydrate cell walls, and this makes it less available. Some plants also contain enzymes that will interfere with protein digestion. These enzymes may be heat inactivated before consumption. For example, soybeans contain a trypsinase that inactivates trypsin, and this is the major protein digesting enzyme in the intestine. Food processing can also damage amino acids and reduce their digestibility in some of these ways. Mild heat treatment in the presence of reducing sugars, glucose, and galactose. For example, in milk processing, this causes loss of available lysine. Lactose also reacts with lysine side chains and renders it unavailable. This reaction can cause significant lysine loss at high temperatures. After ingestion, proteins are denatured and by the acid in the stomach, and then they pass into the small intestine, from where the peptide bonds are hydrolyzed by a variety of proteolytic enzymes. And these bond-specific enzymes originate in the pancreas, and they include trypsin, chymotrypsin, elastin, and the carboxypeptidases. The resultant mixture of these free amino acids and small peptides is transported into the gut cells by a series of carrier systems, each of which is specific for a limited range of substrates. After hydrolysis of these peptides, the free amino acids are secreted into the bloodstream and are further metabolized within the gut itself. The absorbed amino acids then pass into the portal vein and then into the liver. Whereas a proportion of these amino acids is taken up and used, the remainder passes into the systemic circulation and then is transported into the tissue cells. Some factors that may affect protein utilization may include amino acid balance. Each type of protein found in the body requires a specific combination or a specific ratio of amino acids. Unless this individual consumes enough amino acids, then the protein consumed will not be utilized fully unless it is specific. The presence of all essential amino acids is important for protein synthesis. Caloric value. The major source of calories is carbohydrates and fats. As the caloric value of the diet drops below a certain critical point, retention of nitrogen drops, and this indicates that part of the protein was deaminated and used for energy purposes. And if the caloric value is adequate, the level of protein utilization depends on protein needs and the quality of the protein. Injury. There is increased nitrogen excretion after injury. High protein intakes immediately after injury neither prevents nor results in nitrogen loss. These losses can be recovered once healing starts. Most of these antibodies that rush once an injury occurs during inflammation, they are protein in nature. So this is why there is an increased protein utilization in times of injury. Denaturation, one of the properties of protein. This refers to the untwisting of the protein molecules, causing loss of protein structure and function. This process is generally irreversible. The soluble proteins are denatured either chemically or by the effect of heat when their molecules unfold and lose most of their water solubility. Denaturation can be done by heat. This is the most frequent cause. The application of strong heat to most proteins, especially albumin in eggs, causes the uniting bonds to break. Proteins can also be denatured by agitation. The heat coagulates the proteins, and these denatured protein fibers shorten, producing a shrunken appearance. For example, in beating, shaking, or whisking an egg white. This causes the excessive solid sheets of denatured proteins. And finally, denaturation can occur by chemicals. Acids can denature proteins, for example, in milk, forming a clot. And then by freezing. Freezing of foods containing proteins draws water out of the protein molecules, and this causes denaturation. So in summary, you find that proteins are very essential in the diet, and all our body structures are made up of proteins. So it's very important that you consume a diet that is rich in proteins. Both the animal proteins and the plant proteins are essential in the body. So thank you very much for being a good listener. That's all I have for you.